Hello, my name is Kelly Tebow, and I'm with the New Jersey Center for Tourette Syndrome and Associated Disorders. I will be your organizer for this evening and would like to welcome you to our webinar on STOP, an anti-bullying guide for families, schools, and others working with children. Thank you all for joining us. Before I have my colleague introduce the speaker for tonight, I'm going to cover some housekeeping items with you. All participants are muted. If you have a question, please type it in the bottom of your question mark and click send. You may send questions during the webinar. However, we will have Dr. Hartke answer the questions at the end of his presentation. We will get to as many queries as time allows. In addition, tonight's presenter is available to take your questions on the Wednesday webinar blog, which is accessed from our homepage under the heading Programs. This blog will be monitored for the next 7 days. Feel free to look and post questions as often as you like. Answers will be archived for future reference. If you missed part of the presentation or would like to watch it again, an archived version will be posted to the website shortly. We value your input. In order to expand the webinar experience in the future, we need everyone attending to fill out the survey as you exit the webinar. The New Jersey Center for Tourette Syndrome, Associated Disorders, and its directors and employees assume no responsibility for the accuracy, completeness, objectivity, or usefulness of the information presented. We do not endorse any recommendation or opinion made by any member or physician, nor do we advocate for any treatment. You are responsible for your own medical decisions. Now, I'm going to turn over the introduction of our speaker to Martha Butterfield, the webinar coordinator of NJCTS. Marty?
Kelly, thanks. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's webinar. It gives me great pleasure to introduce tonight's presenter, Dr. Graham Hartke. Dr. Hartke is a valued friend of NJCTS, and I'm pleased to say that this is his 7th webinar for us. His previous webinars are too numerous to list here. However, I invite you to check out the webinar archive on our website for his previous presentations. Dr. Hartke's relationship with NJCTS goes back to his grad student days at the Rutgers Graduate School of Applied and Professional Psychology, when he was selected to participate in our Tourette Syndrome clinic. The goal of the clinic was, and still is, to increase awareness and training among psychologists about this often misunderstood neurological disorder. That clinic is the only program of its kind in the country. Now we flash forward to earlier this month when NJCTS announced Dr. Hartke's appointment as the new clinical director of that very same clinic. In this position, he will continue to train doctoral students to work with individuals and families living with TS and carry on our mission to create a new generation of doctors with expertise in the disorder. Dr. Hartke's specialties include Tourette syndrome, anxiety disorders, OCD, behavioral management, ADHD and ODD, Asperger's syndrome, and mental coaching for sports and the performing arts. He is also a New Jersey certified school psychologist. Dr. Hartke, welcome back. We're delighted to have you join us. And now, without further introduction, I'll be happy to turn tonight's program over to you.
Thank you, Marty. And I'd just like to take a moment to thank everyone for joining us tonight for this webinar. And I'd like to give a special thanks to Faith Rice at NJCTS. Also want to thank Marty and Kelly. This is our, I don't know, this is our 8th or 9th webinar. I'm not really sure. So, you know, we've been doing this for a while. But tonight I'm happy to talk about the topic of bullying. Now, there is a lot to cover with bullying, so I just want to let everyone know that tonight is going to be an overview. I'm trying to touch upon a bunch of different areas. So, you know, obviously you could ask questions at the end. I might go through some slides a little more quickly just to make sure we cover everything. But really the idea was to kind of give an overview of bullying. So tonight we're going to go over what is bullying, impact of bullying. We're going to do a quick activity. And then we're going to talk about preventing and responding to bullying. At the end, I'm going to go over some tips for a parent's response if they're find out their child's bullying, and also some tips for school investigations. And we'll go over some resources. Now, just to kind of from disclosure, I've not only have I worked as a psychologist in private practice at the Rutgers Tourette's Clinic, but I've also have been a school psychologist and a school administrator. I have my principal certification, and I've been working in schools for the past 13 years, and even in administrative roles. So in New Jersey, I've been working in these schools, and so I have experience from kind of many different angles of working and responding to bullying. So hopefully I'll be able to bring a perspective tonight. So what is bullying? Now, I will also say there are many websites that have different and published articles and books that have slightly varying definitions of bullying. So if it's not 100% what I present tonight, what you've seen before, it's probably close. But what I'm going to use is the most current definition that, the unified definition that researchers have been using for bullying. So bullying basically is intentional aggressive behavior that's unwanted. It has to have an imbalance of power or strength, either observed or perceived. So it doesn't have to be something that's so clear, but if the child perceives that there's a power imbalance, that's part of it. Behavior is repeated, or has to be a high likelihood that it will be repeated. It's a little bit of a change. In years past, a lot of definitions said it had to be repeated, but researchers are really changing it a little bit to say that it doesn't have to be repeated, but it has to have a high likelihood that it could be. And one or more person against another, and it may inflict harm or distress on targets, including physical, psychological, social, or emotional harm. Okay, so there's four types of bullying that are out there. Some people will say there's three. Lately, researchers have been including four types: physical, verbal, relational, or sometimes it's called relational aggression or social bullying, and damage of property. Now, damage of property could be included under physical, but just the way I think more people are categorizing it here. So physical bullying is kind of the classic image of bullying, where you have someone hitting or punching or kicking someone, direct person-to-person contact. Verbal is saying or writing mean things. Relational bullying can include verbal, but it really has to do with hurting someone's reputation or destroying relationships. And damage to property is what it seems, damaging property in front of somebody, like taking their phone and smashing it in the ground. But it also could include, in a cyber world, altering their electronic accounts, information, hacking, those kind of things as well. So another way to break down bullying is to look at the mode, the visibility, and the setting. So bullying can be direct, face-to-face, or direct communication, so sending a direct text message to somebody, or it could be indirect, so behind their back, not face-to-face, spreading rumors, maybe painting graffiti in the bathroom, or writing graffiti, or setting up a prank that someone will find out about many hours later. Visibility, some bullying is right in the open where everyone could see it, and some is covert or hidden. So a lot of the relational bullying is covert, spreading rumors, having private group chat messages, those kind of things. And the setting also is important. Is it in person, at home, school, social gatherings, sports, or is it over the internet and cyber? These are kind of the two big categories for that. So here's just kind of a graph or a chart, showing different types. So let's look at in-person bullying. So some verbal bullying that's overt or visible would be calling a child fat in front of the entire class. A hidden version of that would be whispering to the child that they are fat and ugly, so no one else could hear it, but it's direct. Physical bullying would be, pulling a chair out from a child when they're about to sit so everyone could see it. And a hidden version would be hitting a child with a basketball when no one's looking. Okay, for example. And some cyber examples. I'm not going to read through all these, but a verbal cyber example would be calling a child fat on Instagram so everyone could see it. Or sometimes there are even way worse terms than that, or many more terms used in some of these situations that are really, terrible situations. Another one would be damaging property. So damaging property in the cyber could be hacking someone's Instagram account and posting false information, which definitely happens. A covert version of that could be hacking an Instagram account so a victim can't log in. The social relational cyber is really what happens a lot, is writing a group text message with the victim included would be overt so the victim can see it, talking about the victim. A covert version of this would be writing a group text message without the victim included, telling everyone not to be friends with that student or that child. So I know many people that are on this webinar tonight are not New Jersey, but a lot are. So I just wanted to talk briefly about some New Jersey laws, and some other states have similar laws. We'll go over that later. But really, New Jersey in 2010 passed the Anti-Bullying Bill of Rights. So anyone that works in public schools is very familiar with this. In New Jersey, we talk about HIB, harassment, intimidation, and bullying in schools. They made it clear in this law that it could be a single incident or a series of incidents, and they also highlight that it needs to be motivated by a perceived characteristic, any of these characteristics here. So race, gender, sexual orientation, those kind of categories. They also stipulate that in the schools in New Jersey, a bullying incident that takes place on school property as schools function or off school grounds, including a school bus, are all fall under the HIB law, meaning that if something happens in off school grounds, kids are messaging each other on their phones outside of school, and it brings it to the school's attention, the school must investigate it. And also makes clear that bullying is unwanted behavior and there is an imbalance. So has a definition. For more information on the New Jersey law, I really recommend reading the Direct Code, Chapter 16. It's linked right here. You can see the latest update. There is one update that someone asked a question about that I am very familiar with because I have worked in private schools for students with disabilities, but New Jersey has private schools for students with disabilities that are private schools but are receive public school students to that school. So the schools are basically filled up by students that are sent from their public school districts to the private schools. There's a new change to the HIB law from July 2018 that if a HIB incident occurs off school grounds from the private school, or if it occurs on a district bus, it's now the sending public school district responsibility for investigating. So if a student is from a town, let's say, I don't know, let's say Montclair, and they're going to a school, if they're bullying someone on the bus ride to that school, that's a private school, they will be, Montclair will be responsible for investigating that. There's also something, if there's different students that are involved and they're all they're all from different public school districts, the victim's district is responsible for investigating. Now, if you have any more questions about this, I could talk more about it later. There's also in that chapter 16, this is kind of laid out very clearly here, or some would say it's not super clear, but it's more clearly than I probably just said. So we're going to move on now. Okay. So some specific bullying behaviors that occur. These shouldn't be surprising to anyone on this webinar, but prank calls, spreading rumors, or even prank texts. Sometimes kids will get fake phone numbers or find ways to hack into a phone or do something where it changes the phone number when they get a text. They'll think they're getting a text from someone when it's not. So now they have prank texts. Spreading rumors, cyberbullying, we'll talk about that in a little bit, which is a major problem these days. Taunts, and any really intentional acts to repeatedly annoy somebody. This I want to point out here too. A lot of times it doesn't really get called bullying, but kids will get picked on repeatedly with very small incidents that will happen. And a lot of times they don't report it. So there might be someone that's every day they see a kid, they'll whisper something to them like, "Oh, you look nice today." And that might not seem like to an adult that doesn't know what's going on that it's bullying, but a lot of times it really is if it's repeated and they continually know they're annoying somebody. And often the kids will say words that only the other kid or a few people know. So the bully will say something to the target or the victim that only really he or she knows what it means, and adults might not know why it would bother them or that it's bullying. So it's more really the intention that's important to know. Some other specific behaviors: sexual harassment, being really sarcastic is a fine line there, so I put it in bold, and humor at the expense of another. So just a word about teasing and sarcasm, and this comes right from the mouth of Dr. Ken Schneider from Rutgers University. So I'm just borrowing this from Ken. Thank you, Ken. But really, I wanted to point out there's a fine line between teasing and sarcasm. It's really important that it's not the intention of the teaser that counts, it's how it's perceived by the target. Teasing can turn into bullying or harassment very quickly. It's a lot of times the tease can be good-natured and benign and equal give and take. But it really needs to be stopped when it's not an equal give and take and the other person feels hurt. Okay, so there's a slippery slope, and the best advice to kids is really to avoid teasing and sarcasm, which we know is difficult, for them to do, but it's definitely something we want to recommend. So a word on cyber. We all know that the usual suspects of where cyberbullying occurs, the platforms on social media like Instagram, Facebook, text messaging, email, message boards like that are out there, like Reddit. I think there's one called Discord. And video games are a really big arena and setting for the cyberbullying. I would take a bet that many people on this webinar tonight either know a child or their child, or many other children that play Fortnite right now, which is kind of taken over. Causes a lot of stress for parents when their kids are playing for hours, but the kids on these sometimes will do trash talking, will talk to each other. They'll be and there's a fine line sometimes. Some kids are getting left out of Fortnite competitions, and that's a form, their kids will say, let's start our game without this other kid in there. Minecraft, Madden, the usual video games that are out there. But a majority of kids report being a target of either viewing or being a target of cyberbullying at some point. And the fact that it happens in an arena where adults are not usually watching means there's a greater risk for it to occur. It's also out in public so people could see it. And the bullying can continue at home with cyberbullying. So boys and girls both use this, and I think most children are unaware or really understand the consequences of the cyberbullying too, that it is often permanent in public. They leave a digital footprint out there. I did a talk for NJCTS. There's an archive webinar from a few years ago on cyber safety, which really goes over a lot more about cyberbullying specifically, if you want more information on that. I do want to point out the difference between conflict and bullying. It comes up a lot, especially for school personnel and parents when there is an issue, and especially in New Jersey schools where you have to determine if there was HIB or bullying occurring. It really is important to distinguish between if something is a conflict and it's bullying. So conflict is a mutual disagreement. Bullying is not mutual. Bullying is one-sided. Okay, and it's that is a key piece to it. So this chart could be helpful. That kind of goes over these areas. So in different categories, you can see how they're different. So in involvement, conflict is mutual, bullying is one-sided. Okay, there's not really a power differential in a conflict. Similar degrees of real or perceived power, and this isn't to be as specific. Let's say like there's a bigger child fighting a younger child. In a conflict that it's always bullying, just if the power is a little off, it's really a judgment call. But in most conflicts, similar degrees of power. In bullying, there's an imbalance of power. I want to point out down here the resolution. Okay, in a conflict, you can do conflict resolution. You can compromise and negotiate. In bullying, there is no concession by the victim. Okay, the victim is really not expected to make a concession, and a fair resolution really involves a change in the behavior of the bully because it's one-sided, and that's a key difference. If schools or parents sometimes misjudge this, sometimes it could really it can impact a victim in a very negative way if they feel like it really was bullying, but it's being treated like a conflict. Obviously, both can, cause damage and emotional harm. And sometimes there's a gray area. An incident that down here, you can see an incident found to be bullying could definitely lead to a conflict in the future. There could be a whole cycle, and that can actually get confusing for schools to work out when they're trying to determine what's going on. And the intent is important here. Bullies intentionally cause harm for the sake of doing so, not to resolve mutual problems. And targets or victims just want to defend themselves in a conflict, mutually competitive opposing actions. Basically, they're really going at each other to resolve a problem. So some data. Now, there is a lot of data out there on bullying, and I could do a whole talk on that. So I'm going to keep it short. But really, there was a very large survey given recently, the U.S. Youth Risk Behavior Surveillance Survey. 14,000 high school students, equally distributed across the United States, were surveyed, and you can just see the data here. I just there's a lot of data. If you want to check this out more, you can go to this link. But here are kind of the main take homes. That overall, about 19% of students in America say they were bullied on school property. About 15% were cyberbullied. You can see in both situations, either on school property, and being bullied on school property is actually the most common place where bullying occurs, even more than cyber, based on the research that's out now. You can see it's not a major difference, 19 versus 15%. And females report being bullied more than males in both on school property and electronically. Some other data just to summarize. 1 out of 3 children are bullied, most at school. 1 out of 3 children bully others. That's a very large percentage of children right there. 3 out of 4 children, so somewhere around 70 to 75% of children report witnessing bullying at some point. And adults are only notified 1 out of 3 times. I think that is an amazing statistic right there. That, even if you think you know what's going on with your children, there's a lot more that they're witnessing and a lot more that they're experiencing than you realize with regard to bullying. It occurs from preschool all the way through adulthood, and it peaks around ages 12 and 14. The 2 most common types are verbal and relational bullying. Boys are more likely to use physical aggression than girls. Girls are often associated with relational aggression. Although I did see a study recently that a large meta-analysis that said that boys and girls engage in relational aggression about the same amount, but a lot of times research shows that girls use a little bit more. And I'll point out that this is an international problem. It also continues throughout the lifespan, and it continues into adulthood and into the workplace. Now, this is not a adult bullying talk, but definitely bullying does not stop when kids graduate high school. So the components, there's the actors. And so the main actors in bullying are the bully, the victims, and the bystanders. And the stage or the settings are schools, buses, but also the other components of the setting are just as important. What are the rules and policy of the setting? What are the cultural norms and the acceptance of and tolerance of this kind of behavior? What is the leadership of the setting? And how do people in charge respond when bullying occurs? These are all very key components. So the bully. First thing I want to point out is that anyone could be a bully. So even the nicest person it's possible, they're probably not, but it's possible they could be a bully. And some people engage in this behavior because they've witnessed it, so they've learned it, or they've gotten reinforced for doing it over time. Bullies, usually after a while, they really are taught to be bullies from what they see and how people respond when they act the way they do. Bullies often have a strong need to dominate. They're often rewarded for their behavior, a lot of social attention. They might gain things. They might take things out of kids' hands, and often they struggle with empathy and other emotional management emotional regulation areas. So, impulsivity, aggression, anger, following rules. And there are some that just genuinely will report they enjoy causing suffering in other children. It's not all, but it's some. I always think this is interesting when I do talks on bullying, is that the 7 types of a bully. So there could be more, but these are 7 different types that you can consider of who could be a bully. There's the confident swagger male. There's the social manipulator female. There's the odd social misreader. So someone who's not reading social cues, but doesn't get that someone is annoyed when they keep pestering them. The victim turned victimizer. So this is when the victim or the bullied turns into a bully. The bullies that feel power when they're in a group, small group, and then the large group gang mentality. The kind of the really evil bullies. So like these are the kind of bullies you would see portrayed in a lot of the 80s movies like Karate Kid, when they're just ganging up on somebody and for no reason, give me a really hard time. Okay, so male bullies. Primarily, males bully both boys and girls overall. I mean, girls also bully boys, but just on average, boys don't only bully boys. They use more direct and overt bullying than girls. Often, just name calling, taunting, belittling, especially on race, ethnicity, and gender issues. And a lot of bullies, which I'm going to highlight here that are male, are relatively socially comfortable and popular and have a positive sense of themselves. So I think a lot of us, when we're growing up, we've heard, oh, the bullies just have terrible self-esteem. That's why they're doing it. But the research doesn't really show that. A lot of bullies actually do have feel really great about themselves. And I mean, if you think about it, you could think, of I'm sure people that you've come in contact with that, they generally, don't have a terrible sense of themselves and they are a bully. And boys do use relational bullying as well. So I just want to point that out. It's not just girls. Female bullies, they primarily bully other females. But like I said, they can bully males. They do, but they primarily bully other females. They usually use verbal and covert relational bullying. So excluding other girls from a group, manipulating, trying to cause emotional pain, destroying the relationship connections is usually at the heart of a lot of these. And really kind of coming up with passive aggressive schemes. So coming into school saying, all right, today when this girl sits down in her chair, everyone look away from her. Or, posting on telling everyone to unfriend someone on Instagram. But I do want to point out that bullying behavior can be stable if there's no intervening with the bullies, and it can continue throughout the lifespan. So it's really important with male and female bullies to intervene. Now with the victims, just like anyone could be a bully, anyone can be bullied at any time. It's more likely if someone's new to a situation, they have something different about them, less assertive, more anxious, physically smaller. Males that seem effeminate and females that seem masculine. So just kids that seem like a little bit different. Some victims have like a wise guy persona, which they might not pick up on social cues that well and might make themselves an easier target at times. Or they might get easily emotionally aroused, so the kids can see that they can't hold their emotions in as much, and they might, the bullies might jump on that. So anyone that has some kind of disability, and there's, as well as these, there's also the kids too that are neglected. So these are kids that are more shy or not noticed. They're socially neglected, I mean here, not actually neglected by their parents, and socially rejected kids who are actively disliked. If you take socially neglected kids who are more shy and withdrawn, and socially rejected kids and put them in a new school, it's more likely that socially rejected kids who were rejected in an old school will be targets of bullying in their new school than the socially neglected kids. And these kids, usually there's something about them. Maybe they have the wise guy persona, that, and that makes them more of a target for the bullies. These are definitely kids that schools should be aware of and give extra attention to, especially if they notice they're being targeted. Female victims experience verbal and social bullying the most. They're often bullied by a group. Males are often bullied by boys. In verbal, like name calling and comments about their gender are the most common. But both genders are more likely to be bullied about sexual orientation. So that's common in both groups. Now, a third group are the bystanders. Now, I know some researchers and publications kind of break down bystanders into many different types, but for sake of this talk, I'm going to kind of just cover bystanders generally. Many people stay passive and quiet while this goes on, and many don't get involved. So the Kenny Genovese case, where 38 people saw her being murdered, is a good example from a few decades ago of how even when people are witnessing something terrible going on, they might not act on it. And it's often many kids are like that. They fear the consequences. They need training in what to do. It could be traumatic for them just witnessing it. And a lot of the times there's kind of that cognitive dissonance where they'll, rationalize why they didn't act. Sometimes it can turn to blaming the victim. They think they don't want to be a snitch, or they'll just kind of say, well, they deserve it. Now, there's some different types of bystanders. There are followers, people that are following the bully. They just kind of go along with the crowd and don't help out the victim. There are active and passive defenders and supporters. So active defenders would be people that actively jump in and defend the victim, and active supporters would support the bully, and passive just kind of behind the scenes would so these are basically bystanders that take sides, and sometimes add fuel to the fire when a bully is bullying a victim. I do want to point out that bullies need adults to be bystanders. So just being on this webinar is telling me that any adult on here is not a bystander and wants to take action. But it's true that bullying needs adults to kind of turn a blind eye or not be around. So by not acting as an adult, it's condoning and reinforcing bullying. And it sends a message that it's acceptable. And we're going to talk a little bit about how climate and culture is one of the most important elements. So why does bullying occur? There's many factors. There's not one factor for everybody. But you got to consider biological factors. Some kids might be feeling have certain personality dispositions, or be more prone to depression or aggression. Behavioral factors are very key. So reinforcement and modeling. Home and social environments, so what they were, kind of environments they live in, or is this normal behavior? Were they exposed to trauma and abuse? The types of parenting, was it overly permissive parenting, or parenting where the parents were overly strict? Is it socially accepted? Is it portrayed in the media? Is there a YouTube video out of kids being bullied or harassed? I was speaking the other day with someone who was talking about a movie that came out in the early 1990s called Dazed and Confused, which showed basically portrayed seniors in high school chasing 8th graders around town with paddles to initiate them into high school after the 8th grade graduation. So I think sometimes in media, kids might, when that happened and you see those things in media, it can spur real life action, because when I was a teenager, that actually occurred in my hometown. I luckily did not get paddled, but it was definitely something where media really influenced the behavior. Kids that I don't think would normally have been involved in it got involved. And we'll just go over really quick. Just to point out some the behavioral reasons too, is often if you look at it from the bully's perspective, bullying is reinforced. A bully is often reinforced positively, meaning they get access to things like attention, friends, money, power, taking lunch money from a kid. But also they have negative reinforcement. Sometimes it might happen, you have to look at this. There might be situations where they're, trying to escape certain situations. So like maybe they feel inadequate, they have trouble reading, so they pick on a smart child. Or it gets them out of class, for teasing somebody. So there could be both positive and negative reinforcement. And also bullying behavior is modeled by others. So kids see adults, they watch what goes on, they see how coaches act, how teachers act with each other, and they see the behavior modeled. So I want to do a quick activity before we go into strategies. And I just label a memory activity. It's not, not like I'm gonna have you remember too many things, but really to kind of talk about the impact bullying has. And I think it really can be driven home if everyone takes a moment and just thinks about, bullying in general. People often remember bullying incidents for a very long time, for their entire lives a lot of times. They might not remember many things about elementary school or middle school, but they remember an incident where bullying occurred, where either they were bullied, they witnessed bullying, or maybe they themselves bullied, or maybe all three. And it can have a major impact on people's lives, sometimes life-altering impacts. So let's just try this out to see how intense some of these bullying memories are. I want you to see what you have better recall of. Do you remember what you had for dinner last night? Do you remember who won the Oscar for Best Picture last year? Now I want to see if you remember, do you remember being bullied or witnessing someone else being bullied, or even bullying yourself? Now, when I do this talk in person and I could see the audience, a lot of people raise their hands for the last one. Very few people remember who won the Oscar last year, I would say. And even less people remember they had for dinner last night sometimes. It's kind of surprising. But it just drives home the point that these are memories and experiences that stay with people for a very long time, and we must act. So a lot of these should not be surprising, but the impacts of bullying, it affects everyone involved. Okay, even the adults are affected. Victims could have intense anxiety. A lot of times they might be avoiding school, refusing school. Sometimes they won't tell parents what's going on. They'll just kind of, you'll just start seeing different kind of behavior. They're quiet. They seem, like down. They don't want to go to do things or talk to other kids. And that's kind of your sign, is kind of the withdrawal or the anxiety symptoms that something's going on. And bullying can really lead to severe consequences, such as suicidal behavior, even in some extreme cases, homicidal behavior. Although they're not very common, they are possible. Bullying occurs all over the world in all cultures, races, and genders. And most of the time is not going to report to adults, as we talked about. So we must actively work to stop bullying, to fight against the negative long-term effects. And these are some long-term effects that I just want to put up here. Some of them are similar. Impaired social relationships, difficulty at work, PTSD, thoughts of suicide, feeling unsafe and powerless, sometimes turning into antisocial acts. So bullying is a very impactful experience and traumatic in many cases for many people. So that leads us to why we need to prevent and respond to it. So there's 3 levels of prevention and intervention: primary, secondary, and tertiary. Primary are preventative strategies, universal strategies, things that all children receive. Secondary are strategies when problems first arise. So we want to stop things in the moment. Secondary interventions is crisis intervention, and some children receive this. Tertiary intervention is really when we have to make specific targeted plans for ongoing problems. If it keeps repeating, if we have repeat offenders or children that really have trouble, either victims, bullies, or even in some cases bystanders. But the key is, and the data shows, that the most effective bullying programs that reduce bullying overall are the ones that are proactive, not reactive. We need reactive strategies and policies to handle in the moment, but we want to decrease the overall level in schools. That's the goal. So I'm going to focus a little bit on this primary prevention because this is where the research really has focused and the results. So here are a few things to think about for primary prevention for bullying. This is the most effective and resourceful way to address it. First is to set up rules in whatever setting you are, either it's home, school, sports, camp, different settings. Clarify the rules, really promote respect, caring, honesty and responsibility, and other good citizenship behaviors. Talk about how bullying is not tolerated and the treatment of others should be always considered. Sometimes making a mission statement and promoting zero tolerance for bullying and discrimination. It sounds commonsensical, but it makes a major difference to have that in place and to go over it with the children. Having policies and procedures in place. So have this in place in advance. What to do if something happens, if an adult witnesses, if a child witnesses. What's your bullying reporting system? Also having a way to assess bullying. Now at home, this is important for parents. You can kind of go through these as well. What to do if, talk to your child. What do you do if you hear witness bullying? Who should they tell? Set your expectations with them. Schools have these systems in place, but, it needs to be reviewed every year. Assessing bullying. So you want to see, check in sometimes, even when you don't hear about bullying, because it's probably going on to some extent. If you see something that looks a little fishy, investigate a little bit. Red flags, such as, anytime that kids are alone without parents around is basically a key time where it might occur. But obvious ones like marks on children, torn clothing, stolen objects. If you're all of a sudden your kid's like, oh, this happens a lot. I traded my Nintendo DS, and what did you trade it for? Oh, I traded it for a bag of chips. That's a warning sign that something is going on, and believe me, that is an actual example of something that we dealt with in the schools. Also, if you notice your kids playing Fortnite or other video games, they're extra upset and they're all of a sudden they don't want to play, or they're screaming and yelling on keeping an eye open and an ear out for what's going on, because it could be going on there. So this step I want to talk a little bit more about is providing and promoting a safe, caring, respectful school climate. So this is one of the most important strategies with regard to bullying, is the climate. And it everything I talked about before is part of this. But there was a study that Maurice Elias from Rutgers did with developing safe and civil schools back in, I think, 2010. And they studied 48,000 children in New Jersey. It's a very large sample. And the key finding when they looked at bullying was directly related to school climate, and most strongly related to the respect children feel in school. So they found that the bullying was way lower in schools where the children had felt respect in the school. So that's very important to work on these things that aren't even seem directly related to bullying, promoting a positive, caring environment that the kids care about. If you think about it, it makes sense. If kids really have pride in their school, the behaviors will improve. But here's some key points. So bullying occurs less and children feel they've been effectively taught to cope with bullying. So kids will say, I feel like I can deal with this if it happens, when they feel respect in their school and they perceive teachers as being caring and supportive of the children and to one another. So this is actually pretty a great finding, is that it's not only that kids perceive teachers as being caring to them, but when kids perceive, when they watch the faculty interact with each other and they see that the teachers like each other, they get along, and they care about each other, that is also a factor. It's also important that they feel they are involved in shaping the school environment. So when kids feel empowered in the school, when they're involved, they're on the safety patrol, or they're involved in student council, or they get them involved in helping in activities in the school, it also helps. So how to do this: establish positive, inclusive communication. These are some tips for helping to have a better climate in school. You could have daily greetings and check-ins in homeroom or first thing in the morning to reflect on things they want to learn. Praising good jobs. Some of these sound commonsensical, but it's important. Second is to teach kids essential social skills and reward them for using them. A lot of the kids in New Jersey schools have some kind of character education in their health classes. Some schools have built-in across the country social emotional learning or character development type programs. But this is important that kids learn these skills and practice them in real time so they can generalize them. So how to do social problem solving and conflict resolution. Understanding others' points of view and empathizing is very important and key. And a helpful tip is to focus on a few core social skills tools. I like Maurice Elias's from his social decision-making curriculum. He's got Be Your Best, body posture, eye contact, speech, tone of voice. He also has some other ones like Keep Calm and Fig Testament for problem solving, but there's a lot of other social skills curriculum out there. But really, when the kids use these, often they know, they're prompted and they go, okay, remember to be your best. Or over time, it does make a difference. Reinforcing positive behavior. So schools have some kind of reward systems, student of the month, or these kind of really helps kind of build a sense of community and a positive climate. You also want to empower kids, like I said before, with inclusive team building and school pride activities. Okay, so we talked about these. Okay. The last thing I'm going to put, which is important, which I highlighted before, is to model positive behavior. So it's essential that adults model anti-bullying positive behavior and show no tolerance for it. When kids hear parents say, do not bully, and they watch parents bully, and I know there's parents that have seen this before, or teachers, with adults bullying each other, it happens. A lot of times it happens on the sports field, in those situations. In sports psychology, we talk about that a lot, that you have to model for your players and your athletes and your students how you want them to behave. But it's really important. Can't stress the modeling positive behavior enough. And also with that is how you handle inter-adult problems in front of children is, when kids watch adults scream at each other, they see that as that's how, and they might not ever want to be like that, but they're kind of witnessing how conflicts are resolved. So it's important to kind of be aware of how as an adult, how, the behavior you're modeling in front of kids. So let's talk about intervening when bullying occurs. This is what most people think about when they think about stop bullying, is in the moment when bullying is occurring, what to do. I spent a lot of time on prevention, and there's a lot of resources out there on that, and most of the bullying curriculums are focused on that because that's what research says, reduces bullying the most. But we do need to have strategies when bullying occurs. So there's 4 main steps. The first step is to stop it on the spot. The second one is to find out what happened. Third is determine if it was bullying, and then support kids involved. Obviously, you're going to support kids involved the whole time. But these are the steps. So if an adult comes upon or hears about bullying, the first thing you need to do is try to stop it on the spot. If it's cyberbullying, you need to do whatever you need to do. Take kids off the video game, the iPhones, Instagram. Just immediately put a pause to it till you see what's going on. The initial goal is to stabilize the situation, make sure people are safe. If in a school situation, if staff comes upon a situation where someone's getting physically bullied, obviously you want to make sure there's no weapons, they're not in danger. Safety first, stabilize. Key here is you want to separate the victim or target from the bully. Do not keep them together. Do not make them talk to each other afterwards. It's not the same as a conflict like we talked about before. Using a firm and calm voice is important. You don't want to go in hysterical. It's not going to help, but you do want to, make your presence known and that it's gonna stop. Okay, you want to reassure the target and bystanders in the moment that it'll be okay. Make sure you model calm, respectful behavior. And you might need to, especially in a school situation, tend to the larger group. If they would just witness something, you might need to delegate other staff members to, divide them up or, keep them calm for a little while and make sure they're okay, and check in with them. And I talked about this before, you want to talk to all the actors separately. You don't want to re-traumatize the victim by having them talk to the bully right away. Or really, you want to really reduce that interaction. Common mistakes. Ignoring the bullying, thinking they'll work it out themselves. This is not a conflict. This is a power differential. It's not mutual. Not that you should ignore a regular conflict either, but this is especially important that you are helping, you need to step in to help a victim. Overreacting and yelling and being frantic is not going to help. Forcing kids to say publicly what they saw in front of the group, like I said, talk to them separately. Getting to long conversations or arguing when responding, these are all things that many of us have seen in the moment. It doesn't help. You really want to calm things down first and then, talk to people later, after safety is checked for. You definitely do not want the kids to make up or apologize on the spot. Like I said, it's a power differential. This happens a lot, and many people have done this and witnessed this, but it's really not the optimal thing to do most of the time. And be careful to start accusing or labeling kids as bullies before you know what's going on, because in defense of kids that bully, which they are accused of bullying, we don't always know if they're actually bullying in the moment. It might be a different story. So you need to do some kind of investigation. So then you want to find out what happened and be objective. Okay, so just try to get the story from everybody. Talk to everyone separately. If it's cyberbullying, you might need to see evidence and look at screenshots and printouts from social media. I definitely we'll talk about this in a little bit, but be very suspicious sometimes of what social media images you're getting, that they're not doctored. There are lots of ways kids can manipulate things, and they probably know more about it than most people, most adults. Kids, are on the forefront of a lot of the technology, and especially how to figure out how to get around, adults knowing who's who. So there's lots of ways for kids to basically go to any web page and that you could ever see, Instagram, a Wikipedia page, and edit the text on the page live. So you could just change the words, take a screenshot of it, and then send it and make it look like this message was sent from somebody else. So when you do it, when you're finding out what's happened, you really want to, start talking to everyone and get the whole story. And try not to call the act bullying when you're trying to sort it out. You could tell someone it seems like it might be bullying, or maybe you just don't want to label at that point. But in the moment, really you want, when you're doing your initial investigation, you want to be objective. Some bullying situations are extremely obvious, and in those situations, it might not take too much time to figure out what's going on, especially if it's a repeated offense from the school's perspective where they've seen it before. So you want to determine if it's bullying. You want to see the history, and support the kids involved. And especially you want to ask the kids who were victims if they're worried about it happening again. Sometimes kids will not really, they'll be scared to tell you how scared they really are. They'll say, no, I'm okay. Even though they're worried because the bully might have told them, if you tell anyone, I'm going to do this to you, or I have some, they might try to extort them, have some kind of picture or screenshot, and so you really got to kind of talk to the kid if they're worried about it happening again, if they made any threats, beyond what they are aware of, kind of assure them that, you're going to handle it. So with the target or victim, you want to listen to them assure them that the bullying's not their fault. You know, be aware that they're going to have trouble talking about it. Try to coach them on what to do if they feel threatened again, you know, with in the school, and know the school policies, who they can go talk to. You know, parents kind of go over strategies for, you know, what you want them to do. And you also want to have a check-in with them and have them check in with you at least a few days afterwards to make sure, or a few weeks after, depending on the situation, or even longer, to make sure they're okay. You want to develop a safety plan, give them some relaxation strategies. You know, one of the things that's important from a school perspective is to work on helping them rejoin the classroom, and developing positive peer relationships. So sometimes pairing them with their, you know, trying to get them away from the students that are, you know, targeting or bullying them, and including them more with the students they have positive relationships with is helpful, and schools can really make that happen sometimes, to rejoin them. Sometimes assigning a buddy could be helpful. So with the bully, you want to clarify with the bully that they know what the problem is. You want to work with them to understand, use it as a teachable moment, and help build empathy. I mean, bullies are kids too, and they need to be treated respectfully when we're talking to them, and from a perspective that they, you know, we need to help work with them and teach them, you know, how to act differently, why it's important to act differently, build their motivation for that, and really you want to help them see others' point of view. Some of these kids really might not be that aware of how much they impacted the victim, and you know, it's not just an emotional pull where you want them to feel really bad about it. You also want them to, you just understand, put themselves in the other kid's shoe, and also, you know, sometimes you really need some very clear consequences very often, so they also know that this is not tolerated behavior. I'm going to point out here that conflict resolution and mediation do not work in bullying. I talked about this before. It's not the same. You should not put a bully in front of the bullied, you know, and it just makes these kids upset. So it can re-traumatize them. The bystanders. We want to hear them out. They might have a lot of information, especially with cyberbullying. And these are the individuals that you really want to hear their side of the story, but you really want to reinforce them how unacceptable this is. Teach them too that this is not tolerated, you know, and this is not okay what you just witnessed. This is where it's key, where the bystanders are looking at how the adults are going to respond to this. And also you want to teach the bystanders, empower them, you know, how to tell adults, how to report it. You know, kind of going against the mentality that they can't be snitches, that, you know, it's really a braver thing to do to stand up against a bully and to help somebody. In some places, the worry about being a snitch is so strong that it creates a lot of problems for schools. You know, and bystanders often feel very guilty, but they feel kind of trapped that they really can't say something and they'll have some kind of retribution. So we're almost done, but I'll talk about tertiary intervention. So this is for repeated offenders and kids and victims that really need more intervention. So this could be, you know, moving placements. It could be having a more specific plan where they meet with a counselor regularly. It could be, you know, some kind of behavior plan. It could be some kind of, you know, schedule of serving some kind of consequences. You know, and really the goal with any kind of plan is to increase positive behavior and decrease bullying behavior. So not just a punishment and not just focusing on not bullying, but also you want to see them increase positive behaviors. So empathy training is important. Okay, so there were some questions about how parents should respond if their child is bullied, and I often talk about this in my bullying talks. So I know we're going a couple minutes over, but I'm almost done, Marty and Kelly. I just wanted to cover these for the parents that are interested. There is not one way to respond to a bullied child, but I think I have a framework that, you know, of areas to consider when you're responding to your child. And it's important to know that a parent's response could really impact how their child recovers. So if you feel like your child's being bullied, it's important for you to respond. It shows them how you're modeling for them how to handle a really difficult situation and what to do. So model what you want to teach them. The first is self-management for parents. It's probably very upsetting and infuriating in most circumstances for a parent to learn that their child was bullied, in any kind of situation. It probably feels very, violating. But it's important that you're there for your child and try to remember to keep calm, be supportive of your child, and try to keep your anger at bay. It's fine to show that you are not happy with this, you're upset, but having a complete meltdown and breakdown and punching holes in the wall and threatening to go after someone might not be the best response for your child to see. In some situations, if someone does that, I don't know, but it's usually not the best method. You want to be mindful of your actions, including if you get upset and you want to immediately contact the bully's parents. When you talk to school, if you feel like posting messages on social media, it's important for you to take a step, think about what you do before you act, and keep your emotions at bay. Okay, so that's the first category to consider. Second is you want to give assurance to your child that you will help them. That's not their fault, and acknowledge to them that it's really brave to report it to you, and it's difficult for them to talk about, because it is difficult for them to talk about. Instead of getting, sometimes parents that I've spoken to through the years will almost seem frustrated that their kids aren't telling them everything, but sometimes it's very hard for kids to admit things. And this also, everything about the parent response to a bullied child is the same or similar for parents responding when they find out or their child has been accused of bullying. So you want to let them know you'll help them, except you're not going to tell a child you think is bullied that it's not their fault, because you really want to find out what's going on. But you can acknowledge them. It's brave to report it. Okay. So some of these are the same, but this is more focused towards parents of a bullied child. You want to empathize and listen to your child. You want to educate your child, and you want to talk to others. So you want to make sure you communicate with the school and other parents. It's important in these situations to know what the law is, what your school district's policy is. It's usually helpful to have a working relationship with the school. Sometimes that breaks down. Sometimes it's a great relationship. And I always say use caution when talking to other parents. Just think about it before you contact other parents of what you want to say and how they might feel if they feel like their child is being wrongly accused. So it definitely, just for, local politics, sometimes it's important to just consider those things. For educating your child, I want to point out here, it can be helpful to practice what you want them to say if they're being bullied or they catch themselves in the situation, how you want them to respond, and really go over what are the steps, what do you need to do if this happens. Just a word on bullying investigations from my experience working in schools and talking to schools a lot about this. It's a sensitive situation when someone is accused of being a bully, okay? School districts in New Jersey send out letters notifying parents, and sometimes, school districts are tasked, at least in New Jersey and I'm sure other states, with having an investigation, starting an investigation. And most school districts personnel as administrators are not trained as police detectives, so they're doing the best job they can. But a lot of times, I think schools just need to be aware of, and parents, that sometimes rumors, gossip will circulate amongst kids when these things happen. If there's cyberbullying or harassment, and it's important that schools document what's going on. Like I said before, be aware that when you're doing investigations, kids are often one step ahead with technology, and some things are hard to prove 100%. They can manipulate digital images. That's just an example. Usually kids don't, I wouldn't say they do that all the time, but definitely, sometimes school districts, I recommend consulting with your tech people or have a real tech savvy faculty member or administrator involved, in the investigation that involves cyberbullying to see if they have any ideas. Also, temporary measures need to be put in place to ensure the safety even before the school investigations are over. Separating people, sometimes, discipline needs to be put in place even just immediately, especially for information you already know. I mean, if you're determining if it's bullying or conflict, but you know there's already a conflict, a lot of times schools will at least put some kind of consequence in for or some kind of measures in if they need to. Communication is key for both schools and parents. The schools are clear if they're investigating children. You know, what are the accusations that they're clear? What are possible consequences? Like what, because sometimes this can lead to a lot of anxiety for everyone involved. They don't know what's going on. And watch out for reverse bullying. Sometimes kids that were bullied will get a lot of defenders who will come to their defense and start really going after the child that they thought bullied, and that can lead to reverse bullying. So there could be a whole cycle of you know, bullying and harassment going on that it's important for schools to be aware of. Lastly, I'll just talk about laws. This is not a talk on bullying laws, except I will point out that stopbullying.gov is a very comprehensive website, has a lot of resources for bullying. One of them is it shows all 50 states, you know, what bullying laws are in place. So if you want to see what the laws are for schools or regulations, or if your state even has them, that's a really good link to go to. And I also point out that in some cases the police do get involved, and sometimes lawyers are involved, you know, especially for accusations of bullying or situations where it continues. So it's important that everyone takes bullying seriously and documents and, you know, does thorough investigations and ensures safety. In cyberbullying, police are often contacted, especially because it happens outside of school grounds, and cyberbullying can occur from all different geographic regions. Okay, so some resources. Stopbullying.gov. The Always Bullying Prevention Program is kind of a gold standard, and there's a lot of research there. A lot of schools use that. NEA and NGA anti-bullying resources are helpful. StompOutBullying.org has resources, and there's a whole other page of resources here. I'm going to point out the second step bullying curriculum. The PACER curriculum is free. There's some resources for schools to use. CASEL has research and information on all different social emotional learning programs that are evidence-based to help with school climate. There is a Not in Our School parent bullying guide that has information for parents more than I provided here on, you know, what to say to kids if your child is bullied. And I have up on this screen here a few of these websites. This is njbullying.org. Dr. Green's website has information for New Jersey bullying. Stopbullying.gov has a lot of resources, information on bullying prevention and resources. The Always anti-bullying program, you can order it here. There's information on it. The PACER National Bullying Prevention Center has free download activities and curricula options. Second Step, this is their website. They have an anti-bullying prevention program, and they also have a very good social skills program, evidence-based. This is CASEL's website, and this is the parent guide, Not in Our Town. Okay, I know I went a little over today, so I apologize about that, and thank you for tuning in tonight. I guess we'll take some questions.
Okay, we're ready, and we have a few. So I'll try a couple. I may need to paraphrase a little bit because some of these are a little lengthy, but I think they're really solid questions. So one circumstance is presented. So on a particular day, one student A is bad-mouthing on student B. And then the student that was badmouth starts telling people not to be friends with the person who was doing the badmouthing. Would that be considered bullying by the girl who tells people not to sit with the person who was badmouthing her? Did you follow me on that?
Yeah, I mean, that's obviously a tricky situation of what to label it. I mean, you could say that they're both forms of bullying, but it also, you'd have to really know if there was some kind of power differential between the kids and what the relationship is. It could be more of a conflict, but it's definitely, the second one is definitely a form of relational aggression. Whether it's a bullying incident would really depend on, kind of if there's a power imbalance between them, if, or if it's kind of a mutual kind of standoff, like a conflict. But sometimes it could be tricky, and bullying could turn into reverse bullying. Someone might bully back or get a group of people to go against the bully, like I talked about. So, in those cases, you might, have to talk to both individuals separately. But that's a good one. Good,
Yeah.
tricky
Well,
situation.
it's similar. I had another question that was kind of similar to that. So, this kid gets pushed in the lunch line and pushed out of the lunch line, and he stumbles and falls or something. Doesn't do anything. Nobody seems to notice. Next day, the kid that got knocked down the day before, he retaliates against the kid that pushed him. So then he gets called on it, though. So the second kid gets caught, where the first kid seemed like there was nobody paying attention. So the second kid looks like he's the at fault here, when all he was really doing was taking a position for himself, by himself, to handle it.
Yeah,
And
this happens all the time. This is where, when you're in the schools working these situations, these come up all the time. It's a lot of times the kid that retaliates for being bothered that gets in trouble. The key with the school is to really determine if it's technically bullying or more of a conflict. Is really determine if it's the power differential, if it's two people having a disagreement. So let's say it's two kids in the same grade who are kind of the same social status. They're used to be friends, and now they're kind of doing that to each other. It might not be considered bullying. It might be more of a conflict. They're having a fight with each other. But if it's, let's say, a 12th grader and a freshman, and the freshman feels retaliates, but really the senior's been picking on him, then it will be more of a case of bullying. So I think you have to do an investigation, and even that chart I showed about conflict and bullying, it comes into play all the time in schools. I don't think it's talked about enough. It's clarifying the difference between bullying and conflict, because in schools, when they have to determine, especially New Jersey schools, what the difference is, a lot of times everyone thinks it's automatically a HIB case, and there needs to be some kind of power difference, and there needs to be some kind of factor that makes it bullying versus conflict. And look, sometimes it's a gray area and they blur into each other, and it could, let's say this kid pushed this other kid back, and then the other kid got a group of people to basically not talk to the kid anymore on Instagram, and that might go more into a bullying, relational bullying thing. So
it is confusing, but I would say in the situation with boys, they would tend to want to try and maybe solve this themselves. So I could see boys doing that more than girls. But at any rate, I want to move on because we have some other questions. So how would you handle a situation when a child was bullied, and this is a confirmed HIB in New Jersey, so confirmed bullying, and then the victim chooses to hang out with those kids because they apologized and now he thinks they're his friends? Do they ever become friends?
I mean, oftentimes not really. The answer, I think every situation is different. I have no way to, I don't have any evidence to say that every time that happens, someone becomes friends or they never become friends. I would be very cautious and suspicious of it. And, sometimes that happens. Kids like, no, I'm good with them. And so a lot of times victims will be really close to their bullies and kind of just take the bullying because it's not, they rather deal with some teasing and bullying for the access to to be part of the social group. And really, I think it's an important time for the adults in the kid's life that notices to really educate the child and talk to him or her about it. I would say that it doesn't always lead to a terrible situation. Sometimes people will get bullied once and it will stop, but often it's repeated. But it can have very subtle forms, and sometimes victims, don't complain about it openly to parents, and they rather just deal with it because they feel like it's giving them some kind of advantage. Even though and they're putting themselves in a bad situation. So I would definitely want to talk to a child about that and keep an eye on it. And in some cases, I'd recommend, really stop that. Take that kid should not be, associating with those kids because they're constantly picking on them, especially in situations where the victim or target is really maybe not as socially savvy as the other kids, doesn't realize what they're doing.
So the imbalance could be just as much as a grade imbalance, sixth grade versus fifth grade sort of thing. But if they're both in the same grade and they're both, let's even exactly the same age, does that make a difference there in terms of that relationship?
No, because it's perceived power, right? So this is why you really need to do investigation and know the setting. You have two kids the same age, and I think anyone that's been in school, that's been alive, went through grade school, high school, could tell you that in most social situations, and especially in school, that there are definitely kids that have more social power than others, or has some perceived advantage over other kids, whether it's maybe the same age, but one's a bigger size. Maybe one is considered extremely socially popular, the other is not, and so just looking at age and grade is really not going to tell you a lot. I mean, sometimes you could have a younger child bullying an older child, particularly in cases if an older child has some kind of difficulty or disabilities, and you might have a younger child. It's not always where the older child bullies the younger child. You really have to kind of assess that power differential.
Okay. This is a little bit off bullying, but I think it's an important topic that I know you have some familiarity with. So talk about helping students with their digital footprint and how they should be more aware of what they're doing online, and because it could lead to bullying. My recommendation is don't have a digital footprint, because I just think you just never know where it's going to end up.
Well, I think that's impossible these days.
Yes,
Almost impossible.
I think it is. Yes,
I mean,
true.
unless you were, unless you're raised in an
Cave.
environment with no technology, it's almost impossible these days not to have a digital footprint. I mean, this is to give a short answer. There's a longer answer. I have a webinar archive where I go over cyber safety. I talk a lot about that, but I think it's important to educate kids about it, and sometimes parents will make their own decision how comfortable they feel, but to monitor their use, let them know. Even kids knowing that you might monitor if you're not monitoring all the time sometimes helps with that. Talking to other parents sometimes will give you information if things are going on. Often schools will find out about these things because kids will tell teachers or counselors what's going on, and so schools sometimes are a place where the information comes in. They could communicate if there's a problem. But as far as managing your digital footprint, really, I think teaching kids about it, educating them about the seriousness of it, the permanency of it, and sometimes, I mean, some people have advocated having a digital driver's license. Like if a kid's going to get a phone, they need to basically almost like take a test or prove that they know, how important it is to really be aware of what you're posting, how it could affect your future, or cause problems. I don't know if that answers it, but
well, that's close enough, because in the big picture, it's just just read the newspapers these days. You can see what a problem that is. So we've gone well over, so I think we're going to wrap it up here. We do have a number of questions that are left, and Kelly will be addressing how those get handled. Dr. Harkey, thank you very much. Really great presentation, and I'm going to hand this back over to Kelly to tie things together.
Well, thank you all for joining us on our webinar, Stop, an anti-bullying guide for families, schools, and others working with children. This is an exit survey, or there will be an exit survey, which we need everyone attending to fill out. The webinar blog is open and available for the next 7 days on the NJCTS website for any additional questions that were not covered in tonight's presentation. I will be posting the unanswered questions up on the website to then have Dr. Hartke answer. That website is www.njcts.org. Also, an archived recording of tonight's webinar will be posted to our website. Our next presentation, Cognitive, Executive, Emotional, and Behavioral Interventions for Students, Designing an Intervention That Works, will be presented by Dr. Sarah Allen and is scheduled for November 14th, 2018. This ends tonight's webinar. Thank you, Dr. Hartke, for your presentation, and thank you, everyone, for attending. Good night.